TFIP started 20 years ago when 14 Philippine NGO partners of EED, the German Protestant Church Development Service, came together in a workshop in Baguio City to discuss the rights and situation of indigenous peoples. We came from different regions, backgrounds, persuasions, and organizations. Everyone shared their experiences and reflections from working with indigenous communities around the country. Some mentioned that indigenous peoples were among the most marginalized sectors being discriminated against because of their traditional culture and identity, while being denied the most basic of social services. Others shared how indigenous communities were threatened with displacement by destructive projects like mining and mega dams. Others who had been working with indigenous communities for many years related how strong and inspiring indigenous people's struggles were to defend their ancestral land and resources. Still others shared how they were lobbying for the recognition of indigenous people's rights at the international level in solidarity with other indigenous peoples around the world. What was most striking to me during that workshop in 2001 was how passionate and committed these NGO workers were in striving to achieve better conditions for indigenous communities in the country. And that was how TFIP was formed. In that historic workshop, we all agreed that we needed to learn more and do more for indigenous peoples in the country. We formed ourselves as a network of 12 NGOs, now known as Philippine Task Force for Indigenous Peoples' Rights, or TFIP. We agreed to pool our efforts and collaborate on a common program for the recognition and advancement of indigenous people's rights. We planned to conduct participatory research, capacity building, sustained policy advocacy campaigns, and networking. We did this envisioning a progressive Philippine society where indigenous peoples are respected and empowered to assert and defend their rights as they freely exercise the right to self-determination.
In its 20 years, TFIP has been steadfast in its commitment to uphold the rights of indigenous peoples in the Philippines through effective research, capacity building, and policy advocacy. Through these strategies, the TFIP has provided indigenous peoples with opportunities to learn from each other and broaden their outlook, empowered IPs by creating opportunities for them to learn more about issues and equipping them with knowledge and skills to confront these, projected local IP struggles nationally and generated national and international support for local IP communities, conducted comprehensive and extensive researches on various IP issues and concerns, thus enriching the knowledge base on the state of IP rights, indigenous knowledge systems, and IP food security in the country, and using these for evidence-based policy and advocacy strategies. Moreover, TFIP has steadily built its name and credibility at the national level in IP rights advocacy through sustained national campaigns and engagement with legislators. Thus, it is in a favorable position to influence policy and push for the passing of pro-IP rights laws. However, attaining these outstanding achievements do not come without challenges. Some of the challenges that the network worked hard to overcome include steps to optimize research results for stronger policy advocacy, bigger role or involvement of TFIP members, partners, and steering committee in the formulation and implementation of policy advocacy agenda, and the consolidation of advocacy efforts within the IP sector or together with other IP networks for a stronger IP voice to be heard. Additional challenges we face in recent years include the intensified militarization of IP communities, red tagging and terrorist tagging of development workers and IP human rights defenders, and the shrinking democratic space for civil society organizations. Despite these hindering factors, maintaining and expanding our links with other networks is seen as indispensable for our work. We have also learned that direct interaction with indigenous communities is essential for effective capacity building and communications. Community-based activities are still the most effective when working with indigenous communities. Trainings on various skills are important for indigenous leaders, especially at the community level. Partnerships with government agencies such as CHR, Department of Education, and even the National Commission of Indigenous Peoples at times, as well as church and academic institutions, could facilitate mainstreaming of important IP issues and concerns, such as IP rights and land rights, and promotion of indigenous knowledge. Engagement with national government agencies and local government units is essential in order to seek their commitments in upholding laws and issuances on the promotion of indigenous peoples' rights.
In recent years, we focused on indigenous peoples' concerns regarding land rights, indigenous knowledge systems and practices, human rights and indigenous peoples' rights to free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC. From 2014 up to the present, indigenous peoples are under constant attack from state agents, while the age-old problem of development aggression through destructive and extractive projects and industries are aggressively pursued. Indigenous communities are facing constant threats from dam construction, large-scale mining, monocrop plantations, and economic zones. Opposition to these indigenous communities is often met with harassment, vilification, trump-up charges, and extrajudicial killing. The indigenous peoples in Rizal, Quezon, and Apayao struggled with the construction of large dams with manipulated and rigged FPIC processes. The Ifugao in the Dipio Nueva Vizcaya may be in danger again for the next 25 years as the government granted the renewal of the FTAA for Oceana Gold Philippines, Incorporated. OGP's first 2 decades of operation wrought damages to the land and environment in Casibo and violations against the rights of the Ifugao farmers living there. These violations of human and indigenous people's rights are committed by state forces and corporations. The years 2020 and 2021 have been challenging for TFIP and indigenous peoples in the Philippines. The whole world was hit by COVID-19, and IPs bore the brunt of its effects and the state's response. They can't do usual economic activities and can't go to centers and cities to lobby for their rights to land and social services. They still suffer from destructive projects and human rights violations, while corporations and state agents are given free rein to ravage and attack their communities. In 2020 and 2021, TFIP has not held on-ground, face-to-face, and national-level activities. We did everything online, and the participation of IP communities were limited because of their limited accessibility. The staff also rarely visited IP communities during that duration. Despite this, we managed to continue by holding online forums, discussions, and exchange programs.
On the whole, TFIP contributed to the indigenous peoples movement in the country. It opened a window for members to link up with national organizations and increase the number of networks that IPs have linkages with at local, national, and international levels. It took part in the formation and operations of networks which carried out campaigns on indigenous peoples' land rights and human rights. Its researches helped in carrying out an evidence-based policy advocacy and helped improve the contents of training and capacity building of indigenous leaders and even advocates for indigenous peoples' rights. The exchange programs participated by various partner communities was not only venues for learning, but strengthened the solidarity among indigenous communities and groups. It developed a niche regarding matters of indigenous knowledge, inherent rights of indigenous peoples, and free, prior, and informed consent. Its human rights program helped promote a systematic data gathering and advocacy methods in addressing human rights violations and encouraging indigenous peoples to assert their individual and collective rights.
Madilim, matarik, matinik ang landas.
Sa ating lupang ninuno at sariling pagpapasya,
may hagupit at kabig sa bawat pagyapak.
may sala sa labid na baging na nakasasagabal. May paanyaya ng dahas at pag-aalay sa bawat hakbang.
Sinong di nangangarap ng isang malaya at mapayapang bukas?
Isang sagana at pinagayamang lupang nagkikinabang ang lahat. Ang bawat isa may ambag.
Marahil, isa itong harayang tinatanaw lamang sa hinaharap.
Katulad ng kabundukang abot langit.
At mga ibong malayang lumilipad.
Naririto ang ilog na malayang dumadaloy.
Naririto ang mga lupang naghihintay na mabungkal.
Naririto ang kagubatang pinagmumulan ng pangangailangan.
Naririto ang kabundukang ating tirahan. Nangungusap silang sila'y ubos kayang kalingain at lingapin.
Madilim, matarik, at matinikman ang landas.
Ang ating pinagsama-samang mga bisig ang magtatawid sa atin upang magpatuloy at sumulong.
Lilikhain ng ating tinig ang isang awit na lulupig sa palsong pangako ng pag-unlad.
Ang ating minanang dunong ay magiging ubod ng inaasam na pag-unlad.
Madilim, matarik, matinik ang landas.
Ito ang ating pangako.
Magpadayon at susulong.
Ubus kayang ipagtatanggol ang lupa.
Pagkakakilanlan at dangal ang sariling pagpapasya.
Para sa ating mga sukling at kabataang
Kakalinga at mangangalaga sa ating bayan.